All right, everyone, welcome to Yurugu discussion, chapter 7, pages, yeah, just chapter 7. I believe it is called Intracultural Behavior. Yeah, and getting started, can we give a concise summary of what we understood from pages 338 to 360.
Real quick, I wanted to add for the summaries, can we also give our definitions of what we think intercultural behavior is, or kind of define it?
Yeah.
I can go first. So for me, I understand, after reading this, I understand intercultural behavior to be basically how white people interact with each other, how racist women, racist man, white supremacists interact with one another. The chapter was very interesting, especially when it came to terms of what freedom means to Europeans. I thought that was very well put together, and it was very interesting in comparison to how white people act with the others and how they interact with each other. So I'm drawing somewhat of a blank, but that's my summary right now.
Yeah,
good.
Yeah, I understood it as the intricacies of European culture, which is like how complex this culture operates, and how complex the European behavior is, if you really don't understand how to examine it. Like, for example, one would think from reading white people's literature and writings that a European or a white person is someone like honorable with like a proud legacy, and a person that is a like proud individual, or a individual who believes in like liberty and freedom. But all around us are hypocrisies to this idea, and that's what we begin to understand, like how does this intricate culture manifest this really sick behavior, disconnected behavior, inhumane behavior. Yeah, and I would like to hear from Ray.
Okay, so let's see, going into summary, let me think. Okay, so basically from the pages that I've read, I've learned the difference between the collective mindset and the mindset of a community member. And also switching into my definition of intracultural is like what is happening within one's culture. That's how I took it. So going into like a European culture and how they maneuver around the world and societies is in a mind of collectiveness and not community, because they don't show community like characteristics. Not that, and that could be assumed too, that they don't know how to, because they've been in this collective / individual mindset their entire existence. So yeah, so I learned how one could be individual yet collective, which is very interesting, because I thought it was either you're collective or individual. But in the European mindset, that happens simultaneously, because they're separated from the idea of community, whereas non-white people mainly practice community rather than the collective mindset. Well, they should, but we have adopted this collective mindset because we have been taught and manipulated from the European to think this way and to maneuver in society as an individual collective person. So yeah, and then I'm gonna pass it to Ash.
Oh, hi. For me, I think intracultural behavior is just the norm within a culture in terms of how they interact with each other, what is normative behavior amongst people of the same culture. And I think for this chapter, a quick summary is talking about how European culture amongst each other is really based on ideas of freedom that are very limited. Ideas of like freedom just opposed to like community, and how that kind of feeds into a capitalistic mindset. And I think what I really liked about this chapter was the analysis of language, because it really makes you think about the fact that since like English, Spanish, etc. are like the most common tongues, how many of us cannot even speak the community that we want because we're limited by this language that is intrinsically like individualistic. So yeah, I'll pass it to Sarah.
Yeah, honestly, yeah, I kind of had trouble understanding a lot of this chapter. It was really dry for me. I read the whole thing, and so I was like, some things that were a little easier for me to understand was like the difference between like Catholicism and the Protestant ethic. But I guess what's sticking out to me or something that was like the lack of spirituality in the European intracultural like practice, which is like how even if they're doing things like as a group, it's not like communal or like spiritual in the way that it would be for other cultures. So that kind of like answered a question that I've been thinking about, just like seeing so many things of like white supremacy lately, like these huge mobs of people, like so much violence, but there is like no spiritual connection there clearly. So that was very interesting. Yeah. And then Ezekiel, I think you haven't gone.
I guess everyone.
Okay, great.
But thanks. Yeah, like what we read, for me, I think it was so like paired with what's happening or what happened at the Capitol building yesterday. Like I felt like, wow, we're literally learning about like the behavior that is creating what's happening at the Capitol building right now. Did anyone else think that or have similar thoughts?
I did not. I just, saw it more as, white supremacy at work right in front of my eyes. To be honest, I wasn't like keeping up with it, but maybe I'm not making as big a deal of it as I should be, which I understand it is a big deal that, that these white crowds, aggressing, some of them are armed, and they were able to actually seize the White House building, and nobody got shot. Nobody died. Well,
I think like four. I think like four, maybe five people died.
I read that an officer died, a police officer, and that was it.
5 people died. 1 officer. Only 1 woman was actively shot by security, and there's like a video of that happening. She's like the one they're putting her face all over because she was a veteran, and then the other people died in other circumstances, one including like he accidentally tasered himself and then got a heart attack. So literally like things like that. Yeah.
I have a question. Was that veteran a white woman?
Sorry? Yeah.
So was that veteran? Okay, so
yeah, she was in the Air Force for like 18 years, and yeah, there was like the video I saw is like so dystopian. Like it's just like it's like the Secret Service has like put all this furniture at these glass doors, and they're like yelling at her to get back. And just on the other side, that's where like a lot of the senators were, etc. Like they were really trying to get in, and they were yelling like get back and literally pointing a gun, and she still stormed in and they shot her. And then they like pan over to the whole crowd, and it's just like all these bearded white dudes, like really incel looking types. Like it's so bizarre and like, you know, just like it's so fucking weird. And yeah.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't think weird is a way to describe it, but it's very understandable and very white supremacy. And I say that it reminded me of this chapter because you can understand like that the white person, the racist suspect, is a so-called individual. The individual doesn't care, like what Ray said earlier, that there's no, the white people have a white collective. They don't have a community because they don't really care about each other, you know. If need be, they will eradicate and off each other, you know, if they have to for their business. So I see those people storming that place, just white people just wanting to be white, and that's what white people tend to do, want to go out and do stuff like that. And they don't care, they don't really care about each other. They're just a white collective. They're not a true community who's trying to like actually bring about change or whatever. They're just having fun and exerting their white power. It's all it is. White people exerting white power.
Yeah, well, now thinking about it, it could be interesting. You know, we could use that model for this intercultural behavior, right? Because it's basically white people interacting with other white people. So I think that is very interesting. I just thought, you know, as Sarah would describe it, and for lack of a better word, you know, it was bizarre, you know, how everything was unfolding.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Saul, like, it definitely makes sense, as in it's like the result of hundreds of years of like these horrible things happening, and these are all people that said they were going to do this, and then they finally did it, and everyone knew it was going to be done. Like, they literally made t-shirts for it saying January 6th. Like, this is extremely premeditated, and even then it is still so fucking bizarre. Like, just like how they're dressed, like the fact that everyone is videoing it, everyone's posting it to Instagram, like it's just so fucking weird.
It is.
And I also saw race soldiers, aka police officers, like rallying them in, like telling them.
Yeah, they let them in.
So
and they were taking selfies with them inside.
Yeah, it's just the way the system works for itself. You know, white people working for each other, helping each other out, even when that is incorrect behavior, they're still going to help each other out. What we can learn, what I can learn from that.
Yeah, very interesting. I wonder how that tie into what. Actually, give me a second. I forget what I said.
Does anyone have any thoughts about pages 338 through 59?
I highlighted the institutional norms. So they're widely known, accepted, and applied based on revered sources, widely enforced by strong sanctions, continuously applied, internalized in individual personalities, objects of consistent and prevalent conformity. So using this as an example, I guess using this as an example, I could see how that kind of behavior is being sanctioned, right? Because they're taking selfies, people are recording lives, they're getting popular off of it. Yeah, people are getting popular off of it. So I could see how something like this would happen again in the future. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, many hints. So that brings me, so I have a question about that I came into mind from reading these 2 pages. And the question is, what type of person was the European in your mind before you became less confused? And what is it now? So what did you think about white people before you were before you started understanding white supremacy, what it is and how it works, and what are your understanding of white people now?
I can start this off. One of the things that thinking of white people like prior or Europeans prior to obviously knowing this knowledge now, I would say that they could be like allies or associates or someone you can hang out with or be around all the time. Not all the time, but just be around and quote unquote be friends, you know. But after this knowledge, yeah, it doesn't exist. So it's very interesting, obviously, like through this transition and how we've been like manipulated and our minds have been constructed to think a certain way about them because we have this talk about, oh, allyship, oh, let's work together, let's all be in this bubble or bowl together, you know, in this pot. And it's like, in reality, it's like you are only saying that because you want to control everyone else, even just like work with them. It's like you want their goods, you're gonna steal it, and you just want the purpose of the European culture. So
For me, I agree with what Ray was saying. I would have thought, you know, that we could be allies, that, you know, you could, you know, work with white people and, you know, you guys can achieve the same goals. I felt that every I could get certain things if I acted and, you know, kind of behaved or did what white people did. And, you know, knowing what I do now, I understand that the system of racism, the reason why white people can, you know, be so happy and frolic and, you know, do all those things is because non-white people are struggling and suffering. So I understand now that because of the system of racism and white supremacy, we cannot achieve anything together. We cannot build anything together. There is no future together with white people as long as the system of racism and white supremacy still stands.
Yeah, for me, I think the biggest difference is like I didn't see the white collective, the racist suspects as being people that warranted suspicion of any kind. I didn't I thought, you know, we all like, you know, just because we were different shades of colors that we were all like the same, you know, psychologically and mentally, spiritually. I thought we all had potential to be the same. But as I learned about the racist suspects, I began to understand that, and as I am less confused, I understand that, wow, the European, we should be always suspicious of racist suspects, aka white people, because the people who practice racism are very powerful people, and throughout history, they have shown us and proven to us that they will throw away as many of us as possible to continue practicing racism. And the large majority of white people have who say they don't practice racism have shown that they're okay with people who are not white being thrown away. So it's a very confusing mess, but being less confused, at least I am able to better protect myself than I used to be. Sarah, would you like to answer?
Yeah. This is a question I'll have to think about for a long time, but I think this book and this group has made me realize how much of European, I think a lot of like the way I've even, and a lot of like the whatever pro Black and Indigenous and non-white people groups I've been in and whatever, white supremacy is like kind of shared as this thing that just like happened to have happened and like happened to have developed, but not like it's an inherent part of like European asili. And that is, I'm like still grappling with that and like has shifted a lot because yeah, and I think like Ash and Swab said this before, that a lot of people are always like, oh, well, if it wasn't them, it would be us or whatever. But like, I don't think that's, I just feel like from what we've learned about like European philosophy, that's not true. This is like, you know, a very specific cultural behavior. So yeah.
Thank you everyone. Anyone have any comments about what we read? Questions?
Yes, I do. On page 338, I'm not sure. I think we're just on that page. I just want to point out how like things are socially constructed, and I thought it was a great way how. Let me see. I think it's the bottom. It starts from the bottom of 337 and goes to 338, and it gives characteristics or just words to describe how this conform happens, and it's through like this rewarding system. So it's like, hey, if you do this, you get this, and then non-white people begin to develop this behavior of I say, they follow, and then they get rewarded, or they don't get rewarded, but they think it's a reward because they quote unquote are alive. And it kind of and the reason why I said that example like that, quote unquote alive, because recently I had a conversation with someone, and they kept giving this example like, oh yeah, you should be happy that it's a new year because you're alive. It's like that's some sort of reward because I'm alive. And I think it's very interesting how non-white people like live their life as like, if I do this, I get a reward. If that makes sense. I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Also, well, I don't want to interrupt your thought, but yeah, that makes sense. I don't know if you're done.
Okay, hold on. Okay, and then so that leads into this idea of like continuously mind like manipulation, because it's like, hey, everyone is moving as sort of like, hey, if I act this way, I can get this. Like, and then for example, like how many of us like are used to going to like interviews, and we like put our best foot forward, do our hair different, have to dress up and do all these things and like kind of transform into some type of European. And then in order to get this reward, quote unquote, this job. And then it's like in all facets, it's like, okay, if I do well in school and turn to this European and have a European thought, I will be accepted. And it just keeps going. And then that's how non-white people feel connected, or into this collective white, into being into the collective white. But it's like, you're never going to be into the collective white because you're not white. So it's very interesting how this mind is like continuously going into like, oh, I want to be rewarded. And then if you don't want to be rewarded and you want to do something different, it's called you're the outcast. Oh, you should be shamed. Oh, you should be this. Oh, you should be that. But yeah, I thought that was very interesting, and I think that's something to say.
Yeah, I what you said brought something to mind about being alive is like some kind of reward, and I think that's the mentality like given to us by white people, that we should be grateful for like having like free time, and we should be grateful for being alive, even though like we didn't ask for either free time or to be alive. So and then it's also creating like whole systems and ideology off like being alive, because to be white, to be alive is to be free, and to be free is to be white. Therefore I don't, in relation to white supremacy, a non-white person can never be so-called alive or free. But I could be incorrect in this thinking, but I'm pretty sure, and I'm actually 100% certain, that we cannot be so-called free or have justice, which is what we should be pursuing. Because yeah, how did everyone understand freedom?
I wanted to comment on what Ray said, because and while you were speaking, I kind of
Yeah.
something. That reminds me of kind of like that concept of individuality that she brings up. And it's kind of how people can, take themselves away from the world and be like, well, I'm alive today, so that's what matters, and that's what I'm happy about. But the world is on fire outside and people are dying. What's so happy about the new year? And I think that really comes to that, that individuality and that selfish that she was talking about, that selfishness. Let me see. Yeah, so that's something I thought about while you guys were speaking. I want to look up that definition of individuality that she like presented us with, or selfishness. But yeah, how do you? That's what I was thinking. You can go ahead, Saul.
Oh no, I was done, but yeah, I also think we should read that her points on individuality, because it's very, very like important information. But meanwhile, does anyone have anything else to share? How has everyone always viewed themselves as like an individual, or have you felt yourself to belong to some group?
Honestly, that's a tough question, because I've been taught to be an individual, but also to be like a communal person. So I'm not sure. I think there's definitely aspects of my life where being an individual is constantly being encouraged. And then there's the, think about others and, care about others. That's also being like present in my life. So I don't know. It's kind of hard to say for sure, but I definitely feel that individuality is the thing that's most sanctioned and most rewarded.
I think for me, I'm like not really a person who's like into the idea of, well, I don't think there's anything wrong with individuality and like self-expression, but I think like in my nature, I'm a much more like communal, group oriented person. But I feel like I'm constantly in this like existential crisis because I live in a society that's very like individualistic and forcing me to be individualistic. For example, when people say things like, well, this is mine, or I don't have to do this for this person, or I don't have to like give you energy type of thing. I'm always like, I think it stems from me wanting the collective whole to be well. But I realized that in the process of doing that under a system of white supremacy, it literally just sets you up to be like, to just have people extract your energy constantly. So it's pretty like tough. Yeah, I don't like, for me, I feel much more, I guess, happy, if happy is a state of being in a moment, if I know that like my community and collective as well.
Well said. For me, I was very much like individualistic condition. I think my white mind at the time, it was very individualistic. Like I didn't even like. I would get confused because people would be like, "Oh, you look so much like your twin brother," and I just didn't think I did, because I was so detached from like everyone and everything but myself. If it was the apocalypse back then, I would have killed my twin brother for a can of beans instead of working together to find a can of beans, because I believe that's the white mind. That's the trait of whiteness. And their older societies, they had to kill their brothers and sisters for a hog leg. And I think that's the training we've been given, and it's so ingrained in us. Well, it wasn't me. Yeah. Anyone else answer the question? All right.
Yeah, I can answer as well. Definitely. I just have to say it and admit, like, yeah, individual thing was just my thing. Like, And I think it's just because like the way I like grew up and stuff is just I don't really like doing stuff with people. I don't know why, and it's just like it's more of a heartache for me than it is like glory. Because on TV they make community look all fun, like not fun, but like they're doing something together. But it's like oftentimes when I see community, it's like someone is always like beaten to the ground, and someone is just um, like taking, you know. So it's like that's how I experience my life, like working with people. I feel like I'm always the one like having to be taken from. And so I'm always empty. I'm literally always empty. Like they suck me dry and I can't do anything else. I can't even like help anymore. So, and that's how it is for me. Like, and every time I think of community, it just kind of like turns me off a little bit because I always feel like, okay, I'm going to be the one sucked dry if I do this. I'm going to be the one that's like having to give everything and no one's giving nothing. So I don't know. Like, it's very weird to me. I'm still learning though. Definitely still learning. I think now that when I am doing something that's communal, I make sure like I make it clear like let's all be like let's all put in together. Like let's all do this together. You know, like I don't want to do something and then someone's just like, oh, it's just because like like you're the leader or something. You know what I mean? Like I want everyone to do it together and to put in and put effort in. And I don't want to just be the one putting effort in and then they're just like, oh yeah, we did this. So I don't know. I'm very weird about that. So I have to admit that.
Yeah, I don't think that that's weird. I think that that's like very not weird. I don't know. And like, I mean, if you consider like the European like culture to be the norm, then it's weird. But I don't think that that's weird. And I have the same like issues. Like I'm unsure if we as a people under the system can even like do things communally and like equally like allocate work, even though I think that that's like the ideal society we should live in. It's like I never see it done, even in spaces where they try to do it like intentionally.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry. And then that's where I'm at. So it's like my question now is like, how do we work on being in, like doing community or being community or like showing like different characteristics within community with people who are under the system of racism and white supremacy? Because we can show community, but if they're not doing community, we get to this point where we're drained and I'm tired. So it's like, how do we like do this communal thing with like everyone being on the same page? Like what language needs to be said? Like, you know. So how we do this? That's the question for everyone.
Ray, that's so real. I feel like that speaks to just like people taking advantage of you or like seeing you as like a giver, as a source of like love and support and energy and like not, you know what I mean? And not carrying that same standard for themselves. And it's definitely like over a long period of time, that's not going to be good for you or for anybody in that dynamic. So that's real.
Yeah.
It's even like
one second. I want to. I think it's. I want to comment on what Ray said, but I think it's really important to understand as victims of racism, we don't have community. We're not allowed to have like real communities. So I think understanding that is and minimizing contact is a good way to not be constantly drained by other victims who have been trained to be monsters and monstrosities, and who like that's all they can do is take because the system hasn't really taught us much of anything else. I think it's really important to like start to be on code and sharing code with people, so we're not confused about why is the Black community always trashing each other. Well, because there's no such thing as a Black community. That's why, just a bunch of victims who are allowed to mill around together and poke fun of each other because they can't. They either are too afraid to or don't have the will to poke fun at the white supremacists or be serious about countering the white supremacists.
Damn, I was gonna answer the question, but I forgot. I was just gonna add, because we always find ourselves wanting to help people, and just really limiting that. I describe those people as like energy vampires, people who are just always constantly looking for you to give them something, whether it's attention or, which is basically just energy. So I always, recommend limiting, like Swa was saying, limiting contact, with those people, limiting, the amount of energy and, setting your boundaries. Because I feel you're still going to have to give people energy, but it's more about being intentional about how you're giving them that energy, in my opinion. If nobody had anything else to say, I wanted to read something off of 341. So she, on 341, she says, now Europeans are almost born with a concept of themselves as housing a distinct psyche, necessarily isolated from all others, and as being responsible only to themselves. This, as she later says on, this idea is reinforced throughout the culture, and so it is that the idea of identification with, love of, and sympathy of empathetic understanding for others goes against the grain of the European tradition. It is in epistemological, ideological, political, and spiritual contradiction. In the West, skipping a little bit, in the West, the self is primary and survival depends on the cultivation of self-centeredness. One must be allowed to be properly selfish, and that is what it means to be free. So I wanted to get everyone's opinion on that. How do we? So she says that Europeans are born with a distinct psyche that that allows them to only be responsible to themselves. What do you somebody what does that like mean, or what does that look like? If somebody is willing to answer that, because I don't really understand what that really means or that looks like.
It's that overbearing sense of entitlement that every white person naturally has. I think that's one way to see that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think it also maybe means that like no one from other cultures, even like to them, no one from other cultures even has the right to critique their culture. And if they do, it comes from a place of inferiority. So I feel like they don't have to answer to anyone. For example, like people won't care if people from, let's say, Rwanda are being bombed or something, until a white person says, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that. You know what I mean? They always need like some sort of, that's what I think it means.
Okay.
Yeah, and also in that context of how she mentions how like freedom came to be born in the West, like to me, it's very freeing, I should say, for a white person to have total freedom to come over here to the Americas and like slaughter the natives and then call it their home. And maybe that's why other people can't be free, because we literally cannot go to other places and slaughter them and then call it our own.
That's interesting. Yeah, I want to remember that later on for freedom, because that was honestly a very abstract thing that I couldn't really understand, like what she was talking about. But before we go on to that, I wanted to bring up that last part where she said one must be allowed to be properly selfish, and that is what it means to be free. So when I read that part, I was thinking about how like in some cases, we were presented with the option of helping this person, or if I help this person, I could possibly lose everything that I have, right? Or I'm gonna lose something in the process. And if I I feel that is something that is common because we're always having to choose whether to help somebody or to be selfish. And a lot of times, you know, being selfish is what's rewarded and sanctioned. And that kind of reminds me of the example you gave right now, Swal, about going and killing people in other lands. I mean, that's, I would consider that to be a very selfish act, you know. So, yeah. So I guess I could see how that does allow people to be to feel free. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like selfishness is such the just like the backdrop of this whole society. Like even people who do like it's even taught for like, you know, young people when they want to volunteer. Like it looks good on your application, things like that. It's nothing is based in an intrinsic good of, you know, producing justice or like, you know, doing things just out of yourself. There always has to be a self-interest involved to justify to other people why you're doing it. And I think even like non-white people fall into that trap so much where you can't just tell your family like, I'm going to do this, you know, like task of like helping someone without them being like, why are you doing it? Why are you spending energy on it? What are you getting from it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so that often it also reminds me of kind of like, because I see politics as being like the best way that, you know, white supremacists express themselves. So it reminds me of like often in politics, you know, things like world hunger and all these other atrocities going on, and you know them always having to kind of negotiate with them, like, oh, can you, like almost like having to go beg them, that not almost, that's definitely what's happening. They have to go beg them for aid and for them to help them. And you know, they'll come up with some excuse. It doesn't even matter. It doesn't take much for them to make an excuse. They'll make up something as to a reason why they can't help them, which is just, you know, for very selfish reasons. Because I could walk in the Costco right now and I could see enough food to, you know, to freaking feed a whole region, you know, like, yeah.
Yep. I think in the what you guys have been saying gave me like this thought that, wow, in a system of racism, like of course we have to live in a very selfish society, in a society that places value on literally everything, on things it can see, on things it can't see, on everything it places value, which reminds me of how it used to place value on black bodies, how black people used to be called bucks, you know, I need, you know, this buck is worth about 25, you know, but and just all that's and just the whole history of like value of people, and how in the system of racism black people are worth money, like we're owned by the system. And I think to add this point home, on 343 she says let me see. She found that oddly enough, the idea of freedom, as in free objects, tickets, for instance, meant that they were desirable but had no value. One saves money when something is free, but because it does not cost money, it is therefore not itself valuable. Then there is the idea of freedom as in free time, where free time means uncommitted. Again, Lee found that such free time was not itself valuable. That is, it became so only when when it was filled in accordance with how it was filled. It is somehow wrong to have too much free time. One has to go on and give an explanation or justification for such freedom so as to endow with a validity which is certainly not self-evident. The person who has nothing that he has to do is suspect and lacks value. And then she talks about how she always hears people talking about, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, I'm so busy, blah blah blah. And I'm sure this is rhetoric we all hear. I always hear people talking about I'm too busy to do X, Y, and Z. And I've always had like the logic, despite my conditioning, to like understand that. Like, but if you really want to do something, I believe you should have the time to do it. At least work on it a tiny bit, because there's so much time in a day. But I don't know. Maybe I just experienced 24 hours totally differently from other people and victims.
Yeah, her definitions of free and freedom were very like interesting. I found them to be mostly negative, and it was strange really reading that, because growing up and being conditioned and trained in Western society, I've been taught that freedom is the ultimate like reward, right? That it's this thing that you should always strive to gain. And I saw so it was very like confusing when she was like kind of saying that, because especially that section you read right now, so I was very I kind of understand it a little bit better, but like I'm still kind of confused. I understand kind of what she's trying to get at, that this idea of free or freedom, because you can't like it, because like there's no value to it, right? Like somebody help me out here a little bit maybe.
She's trying to say that, like, though, like, European people espouse like freedom as their like main, desire, like the thing that dictates whether a culture is valuable or not. It's a very like strict definition of freedom, and it's basically the freedom to dominate, the freedom to be selfish, the freedom to not care about others. Other types of freedom are not valued in that society, i.e., free time, because that free time exists, like, I guess, in contrast, or is like the opposite of like the freedom to work or dominate, if that makes sense. So, like, being idle is not the type of freedom when they talk about freedom, right? It's just like that type of the type of freedom they're talking about is the freedom to buy things without caring about the environmental footprint, things like that.
I see.
So it's like,
okay.
when you hear people talk about our freedoms, which they talk about a lot on the news, etc., and they like indoctrinate children at a young age with that, it's a very specific type of freedom based in white supremacy, right? Yeah. Because as you can tell, like most of us are not free, in that we have to work to survive, to live, which is like the opposite of freedom.
Yep. It's like the rhetorical ethic. So when we're saying like we pledge the allegiance, we're pledging to be slaves who attempt to like pursue liberty and justice. White people are saying that, aware that they're free and they have the power to do whatever they want. I think that's how the racist logic is spreading out. And the Pledge of Allegiance, for example. Does everyone understand what I just said? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Like, to add on to that, I feel like if you asked a white person what does freedom mean to you versus a Black person, it would be very different, I think, their definition.
Yeah, thank you for that, because now I understand, that was very different now, but I clearly can understand like what freedom means to, the white supremacists. So now all the dots are connecting. I liked how on 342 she talked about the African-centered perspective, and how it helps us recognize that the kind of freedom that Williams describes may be meaningless or undesirable to people whose concept of personal worth and human value are radically different, and or that freedom as an abstract concept may itself lack value as a human or cultural goal. In other words, in America, freedom is a household word that children are raised on. But it may well be that within the context of a harmonious communal grouping that does in fact protect and nurture the growth of the person, this freedom is merely the description of something negative. So when she gave that example, I thought of like this is my imagination, a communal group, communal Africans together, and one such African wanting to leave the group and seeing that as what would be described as freedom, right? But it's also, why would you want to, what are you going to, what do you want to leave for? What are you seeking? You know, everything that you have, everything that you need is here. So what exactly are you trying to achieve or, you know, get? And so I thought that was, I highlighted that last part about yeah. So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, I think it gets to like what Ray was talking about, that if, you know, everyone is working in a communal grouping and you are allocated this amount of like work that you have to do, and you believe your individual freedom and rights means that you don't have to do that work, right? Because you're an individual and your freedom tells you that, then it is inherently negative, right? Because it takes away from like the productivity of the group, and it infringes on other people's freedom because they're going to have to work what you didn't do, giving them less time to just, you know, be leisurely.
Very great. Very well said. A lot of this stuff is clicking for me right now, so I'm kind of like excited because, you know, I was wondering this stuff. I'm glad I came today.
Yeah, the chapter is very, even for like for me, it's very, very complicated, and I had to read some of this over and over and over and over. It took me quite a while to finish reading this chapter.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. So just going back really quick to our discussion on like community, when we had that discussion. What was the part? Sorry, I just remembered. I forgot. Oh, yes. So if we're not practicing, like if we're not allowed non-white people to have community, I kind of know the answer to this actually. What are we practicing and what should we do? And then my answer to that would be like to be on code. But just for the sake of this YouTube or for this video, like what are some things that people could literally work on like right now, like as we speak, like what can they work on right now in order to create,
Finish your question, Ray.
What?
Go ahead and finish your question.
Oh, okay. So my question is, sorry, I totally forgot. Now I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry, I can't.
Well, from what I understand, I think it's people can all if people want to try to do something, they can all attempt to produce justice. You know, replacing the system of white supremacy with a system of justice. Yeah.
So, Ray, your question was, how do Black people, you know, begin to start a community? Is that the question? Trying to clarify it.
Sorry, I'm drinking. But it's kind of like that is the question, but not really. Only because like since we talked about earlier, like Black people aren't allowed to have community under the system of racism, white supremacy. So, what does this like building look like? If we're not calling it community, we can just call it together. You know, togetherness.
I think it's the code. You know, all about creating a universal, independent code. You know, that everybody can get on and follow, which, you know, will inevitably create a community. And it doesn't require that, you know, we are in close proximity with each other, because, you know, white supremacy won't allow that to happen.
Yeah, exactly what Ezekiel just said. Once we have a system of justice, that will be a great community. But until then, it's just spreading the importance of attempting to produce justice, because that looks like a lot of different things.
Good question. Damn, I took one. I have something I wanted to read because I need clarification. Let me come back. If somebody has something they want to say, they can go ahead. But I got. Okay. Sorry, go ahead, Ash.
Okay. Yeah, I liked at the bottom of 343 and the top of 344, where she talks about like free time and quietness and the idea of like empty spaces and how that is like uncomfortable for the European. And I think so much of us, like so many non-white people, are becoming European in that constant feeling of like stimulation and the discomfort with like being in like emptiness, being like alone, or being with thoughts, or not even having thoughts in your mind. So I just really liked that she put that in there. Like it says, to the European, and he experiences silence as either embarrassing or frightening. And I think that like we all go through that too, because I think even when people are free, their free time is spent like, I would say like most of the population, their free time is spent watching TV, which is like not really free time in terms of your mind not being like your mind is still being constantly stimulated and indoctrinated. So is that really free time? I don't know.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. I also had that highlighted, and my comment on that page was it talked a little bit about loneliness as well. And this all stems from like as soon as the stimulation stops, you instantly start feeling lonely, you know. And that all comes from like not being able to sit by yourself or just sit with your thoughts. And also like it's being taught too, like, you know, all of these social media apps and then all of these like different things. You always have to watch something and do something. And one of the ways that I fall victim of this is I just like I always want to do something, although it's not always like stimulating. Like I'm not watching something or listening. I actually like to do things quietly. Like sometimes I'll drive with no music. I just like doing something, but quietly. I'll put something. I'll organize something. Do house chores, but things like that. But it just needs to be quiet. And I don't know why. I just love having it quiet. But I guess that could be stimulating too, because I actually find joy in organizing. So, yeah. Oh, and one other thing is that ties into mental health. And this all stems a lot from like why people always feel so like lonely or anxious and all these other like mental illnesses is because we haven't practiced enough of this one, of how to be by ourselves, of how to obviously manage our emotions and sit with them and work through them. We're so quick to like medicate with it and just, oh, what's the quickest thing to just like make me numb to this feeling? So as soon as we're not numb, we have a mental illness, we have to be on meds, we have to do all of these other things. So it's important that we start to practice being by ourselves and taking care of ourselves and our thoughts and just sitting there.
Yeah, I think the part that I also have highlighted and we've been talking about is like the indication of like just the immense like anxiety that white supremacy produces. And it's because, wow, this is just like a natural thing that they experience when they're not being distracted by how the many ways they go about distracting themselves, whether it's like laughing at us being terrorized or coming up with new ways to terrorize us or stuff like that. It's really interesting. Thanks for sharing those points. Wow.
I forgot what page it is on, but I can't seem to find it right now. But I loved the part where I think it was not her. I think she was quoting someone, and they talked about how most kid's first word is my. I just thought that was so interesting, and I was like, wow. And it takes so long for children to learn the word our. And it made me realize, like, even the most like innocuous thing that you think is just cute is so based in like European culture and like white supremacy. The idea that like what the kid first learns about is like ownership of things. I thought that was super interesting.
Ownership of objects. That page is on 348, Ash. So I mentioned a little bit earlier, or thanks to Ash clarifying what freedom means. So I had highlighted on 344. I made a comment actually. I made a comment about how now we're seeing that this idea of freedom is tied to the cultural other, and by them, having power and the will and the ability to do, as it states on 344, freedom is defined as the ability to do without constraining forces, and how that is tied to the cultural other. So they define freedom as the ability to do and control the cultural other, control the objects. I just wanted to state that. But then what Ash was talking about was on 348. I also thought that was very interesting and kind of mind-blowing, because I had no idea, and that is like, I have 3 younger siblings, and I've watched them all grow up, and their first words, were my, each one of them, mine, My dad even tells me that was my first word, mine. I used to just go around saying mine,
Yeah, it's really interesting too, because so many parents kind of raise their kids in very materialistic ways and then are like shocked when their kids don't like share, when they've taught their kids to like get so much emotional gratitude, I guess, or not satisfaction from buying things, and then they wonder why that same toy they don't want to share on the playground. And it's like, well, you made a whole ritual out of this thing, that them owning this thing. I just think it's interesting, and then they chalk it up to human nature and not like them nurturing that in the child.
Damn, facts.
Yeah.
Damn.
I used to literally call my attempted mom my. I used to just call her that. I still call her that sometimes. So just like case in point that we live in a really really off society. It's glad to have that understanding of this sort of behavior, though.
Yeah, I also thought on page 349, when she talks about, I think she's quoting Dorothy Lee again, and she's talking about that, like how Europeans see things as like hierarchical. So like the self-conscious is seen as lower. And so it says like passions are considered lower, i.e., I fall in love, I fall into a passion or a rage. And if you go later on, it says I never fall into consciousness or reason. And that's when I was just like, oh my God, like I feel like non-white people just have to like abolish English, because it's like literally like everything that we say is reinforcing like the asili all the time in ways that you don't even think about. And it's so true to that when you fall into these things, it's almost like, yeah, like these things are lower feelings, lower thoughts. They're not based in like anything rational, therefore you succumb to them. It's not like, you know what I mean? It's not like it's not like you falling in love with someone is because you feel a connection based on like higher entities, based on whatever, maybe you have a connection to them ancestrally. It's nothing higher. It's just like this lower feeling of almost childishness. Yeah.
I also had that part highlighted, and I agree completely with what you were saying. And it's amazing how like it's done subconsciously and unconsciously. Like I would have never ever like equated that or like connected those dots, you know.
Yeah, there's a part where well she mentions this I think this white author Lee, and she mentions how like we live in like a society that like really doesn't control white people. It just delimits their power. Like, you know, a case in point, like um after slavery was over, no one said, okay, white people, owning slavery was really bad for your mental health. So y'all have to go like get some treatment because we were doing some really sick stuff. Instead, they just delimit their power by saying, okay, you know, you can't own black people anymore, which doesn't it's just insanity if you really want to if you really look at it that way. They just that's how they go about controlling one another. They just limit the power. So yeah, you can have your guns, but you can't kill anyone unless you have probable cause, and then they call it justifiable homicide. So reading this portion has allowed me to just understand like the way they really maneuver, and I think this is why this book is so important, because we learn how like white people have done it, how they've done it.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to go to 350. On page 350 and 351, she kind of talks about individualism a lot. I mean, we've been kind of talking about it, but I felt like she honed in on it. I was listening to a lecture recently where by Dr. Ani, where she said that individualism and materialism destroyed African culture. And so she talks about how individualism came into being or how it became valued. She at the bottom, she says, what results is the concept of the individual, the smallest unit of the social group. This atom of the human universe is invented by the European as the seat of rational thought, the seat of moral action, the locus of power. And like, that got me thinking, okay, so now I'm trying to step out of, thinking of everything from a European perspective to an African perspective, where the group, where the group is valued. So when she said that, and the smallest unit of the social group, it's almost like an individual has no real value, like on your own, right? And I thought that was very interesting because we've been taught, you're the most important thing to yourself, like I've always, I don't think there's anything wrong with like looking out for yourself, but I've always thought differently, right? Like in the terms of a group, like you should always be looking out for yourself no matter what, even if you're in a group. And she goes on, and that's kind of a narcissistic experience now that I think about it, in the little those little paragraph symbols. Yeah. What did you guys think about that, or about individualism in general in that context?
What page was that on again? Sorry.
350.
Thanks.
She also goes on to say an individual can never truly experience the we-ness of things. An individual can never experience phenomenal reality as an extension of self, only as a negation of self. Give me a second. I gotta take a phone call real quick.
Is Ash talking right now? I can't hear anyone.
No, I was gonna respond to what Ezekiel said, but I was just waiting for him to come back to respond.
Oh,
I don't know if I should just respond or not.
I don't know. I didn't know he left, so we should wait.
He said he had to take a flight.
Or not. But going back to individualism, like Ash was kind of saying earlier, there's nothing wrong. Is everybody still here?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
like Ash was saying earlier, there was nothing wrong with like being an individual, right? But the way that she puts it, you know, it's a negation of self. Now, I'm not saying, I don't think she's saying individualism in general is a negation of self, but what are your thoughts on that, Ash, since you made that statement earlier? Putting you on the spot.
That's a good question. I mean, wait, so you're asking what is my thoughts about an individual could never truly experience the we-ness of things?
Mm-hmm.
I agree with what she's saying because when I say there's nothing wrong with like being an individual, I mean there's nothing wrong with like having interests that are outside of the group, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that are just interests that's like that soothe you or like suit you. But I mean like I think she's trying to say like the solely individual person, like the person who exists only as an individual. Does that make sense?
I see. Yeah, it does.
But I also really liked that part because I think it totally like it's just I think it encapsulates a lot of the whole like white kind of like white spiritual culture that they so-called have. It's always like I like that she says they can never experience phenomenal reality as an extension of self, right? Because they don't see themselves as like having that power. So it's about I have to destroy myself. And so they like will go through all of these like I don't know, like the people who go on these spiritual journeys and stuff, it's not about finding power within yourself. It's about killing yourself almost to become spiritual, which I thought was really interesting.
That's funny. It brings me into that horrible fanatical book they made me read in high school called Into the Wild, and how that guy went into the wild, basically just committed suicide to get closer to something, you know. And yeah.
That's so funny because I really liked that book.
I hated
I have
it.
to like reread it because I wonder what my thoughts on it are. But yeah, I agree. Like that yeah, exactly right. It's like he has to almost kill all of himself to be amongst like nature. And he had to do it in like the most extreme way instead of it being an extension of himself.
So we understand the individual as literally the Yurugu, I believe, just like another Yurugu, a person who is truly disconnected from himself due to how like this society always risks white supremacy separates mind and body, spirit and self, or just a bunch of ways in which we are taught to divide ourselves. Therefore, we could become these individuals who can have like unique so-called experiences that really serve very little purposes in terms of producing justice.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like there's like people who fetishize like traveling and how like you grow as a person or something, and I want to experience the world. And it's such a like based in this like I feel like maybe I can't completely like think about it fully formed, but it just strikes me so much as like the European asili, in this idea that you're just taking from these places only to enrich yourself. It has nothing to do with like building community outside. It's like people who travel don't keep in touch with whatever people they meet, right? When they do that, it's almost just like that was my escape. But those people's who you have fetishized, like that's their day to day, you know, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. It does make sense. I wanted to add on to that because I wrote here that like individualism like ultimately led to white supremacy. Is I put European culture creates a being who thrives on competition and therefore on individual and distinct achievement. Because there is not a natural regard for personal worth born from and supported by the culture, because a person's existence as a member of the group does not in itself mean much. The individual strives to be better than, to stand apart from others in his craving for recognition. I skipped later on and it talks about basically what binds the members together is the common goal of suppression, exploitation, and control over the rest of the environment or the world. So I guess like I'm talking about individualism in terms of this like, you know, I don't want to say hyper, it might be hyper, but you know, whatever individualism means to the European, you know, that's what created this nightmare that we all live in. That's my opinion, my VGQ.
I agree. Like,
Yeah, I agree too. I thought on 352, there's a part where she says the community is created by the spiritual communion or joining of persons. Its proper functioning and perpetuation is dependent on healthy, whole, committed, happy persons. That is why healing rituals have a communal aspect and why the morally evil is represented by a person who attempts to function autonomously, causing harm to others and creating distress. And I thought that, well, it reminded me of two things. I liked that she said that is why healing rituals have a communal aspect, because I think a lot of times people, like, there's a big thing to tell everyone to just like go to therapy, but like I feel like also like, though I do think that therapy is good, it's also just like you're like going to like a person who's trained by like white people to like tell you how to function in this white society. There's nothing like communal about therapy. There's, unless I guess you're like in group therapy, but then even that is like, unless you're with like your actual in group that you spend other times with, I don't know how beneficial it is. Like I feel like communal healing is something that we don't have as a society, and it reminded me a lot of Daughters of the Dust, the part when they're like having that kind of like ceremony where they're kind of talking about their issues to each other in front of everyone. And I think even Dr. Ani talks about how that happens a lot and it's a very lighthearted affair. And I think that if we had things like that, we would be able to heal a lot more instead of like going to therapy. I don't think that therapy is intrinsically bad, but I don't think that it's like a catch all. Like it's not just like the answer to everything. And I also thought it was interesting because like even in Daughters of the Dust, the woman who is like the Christian who left that community and went back, is she kind of reminds me of that that morally evil is represented by a person who attempts to function autonomously. Her and the main character who comes back, because they start off wanting to separate themselves from the group, and in doing that they're causing like confusion and within their community.
yeah, I really like this page and like what She says, and I really like what you said, because what I'm gonna read is very similar, and adds kind of like the European it about is what you said more. So I'm gonna this is from 352, and she says the European conception of being tends to eliminate the need to consider the thoughts and spiritual states of persons, since in that dimension they are considered powerless. It is part of the mythology that the European is motivated by strong inner convictions, a high degree of self-respect, while people in traditional cultures are like non-thinking automatons whose spirits are ruled by their cultures. But it is often the majority of cultures that finds impressively strong standards of behavior and personal commitment to ethical behavior. So I think I really like the part non-thinking automatons, because this, although this is just a view that white people have on the other, they still project this in their entertainment and in other areas of people activity. Like they would prefer us to be this way, and that shows in like how black people are always like the servants are like made to be robots or like non-humans in television and TV. It just reminded me of that part. But just to be thought of as a non-thinking automaton, maybe saying that to someone can allow them to understand this is how slavery happened, because white people can't think of me as anything but this non-thinking machine.
I had that part highlighted as well. I wrote down that that was a projection from the European, because I would categorize them as non-thinking automatons, because they're solely driven by, you know, racism and white supremacy. They don't think about anything. You know, they go around killing people and don't think about the consequences or anything. So I wrote that down as a projection.
Yep, well, agreed. That's very
Yeah, and also like to add to that projection too, it's like not only are they not thinking about it, it's like I feel like they think about it, but they just don't care. You know what I mean? Because they have that individualist mindset, and when they do something, it's like, oh well, it's gonna make me better, or it's gonna boost me up, it's gonna make me have more power, it's gonna make me, you know. So it's like having that unconscious and conscious thought process, and like just actions of just like, personal gain is fine. And that can go as simple as like if there was like two people competing in school, I no, not even in school, like for a job position, they will probably they'll like sideswipe you before you even get a chance to even interview for the job, because they're just, that's how they are, you know. So I think it's very important to understand like it's like they're non-thinking, because I don't even think they have the atom, or like they don't have the little thing to think. But I do have to say that I feel like they do think though on some of the occasions.
They only think about how they're gonna dominate non-white people. So you're right. They do think. That's just my opinion. Again.
Yeah, I think they think, but it's like it's just based in like self-interest. So in a way, they're like automatons, because if it's not based in self-interest, then they don't consider it as even like an option, and they don't even yeah.
I thank you for that. On 353, I wanted to read a part for clarification. It says, as long as the European believes the autonomous individual can be the basis of his own happiness, or that the individual psyche, as Havelock puts it, is the seat of moral conviction, and that rationalism can be a source of morality, So then will his culture continue toward moral disintegration and his spirit continue to wither? The process started long ago, but the worst is yet to come. It is precisely the autonomous individual in Western society who is its weakness. There are no longer guidelines for him to follow, and he has no tradition within his historical awareness from which to create them. So I wanted to know I need a clarification on who this autonomous individual is, and how is this individual the weakness? I didn't understand. I know I wrote this down before, obviously before this meeting. We did talk about the autonomous individual being like the non-whites just right now, but do you think that is like, can somebody just clarify that for me? Because I don't really understand what's being said there.
No, the autonomous individual is the white person who exists. I think when Swab was talking about earlier is the automatons, which is like people who just like do things without thinking. But here she's talking about the autonomous individual, which is basically the free individual. That's the downfall of like Western European society, which unfortunately becomes a downfall of like the rest of the world, as you can see with like climate change, in terms of like one of the biggest ways to like, you know, end climate change is to change people's relationships with products and how things are produced and consumed and how much we consume things. But I think that because people care more about their individual liberties, that they don't care that, like, you know, the coral reef is like withering away because they want more, if that makes sense.
So the autonomous individual is white people. And so he's saying that a free thinker is a weakness in Western society.
No, wait, what do you mean? Wait, what part are you on?
I'm on 353. He says that it is precisely the autonomous individual in Western society who is its weakness. So wait, and are autonomous individuals and free thinkers the same thing? Would you categorize them as the same thing?
I think so, in that very definition, the definition of freedom that she talks about, like the European definition of freedom. I have to think about this. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts.
Yeah, yeah, that's actually an interesting question there. Yeah, I think she's just getting at the core of the culture of saying that it's really like at the root of white supremacy, at the root of what the Europeans have devised. There are no guidelines for him to follow. He has no tradition within his historical awareness from which to create. So the European is really like left to just go out into the world. Yeah, he's white, but everything that means white is means abusing people, manipulating people, or getting over on people. So I think he's just like, there's really no, like, if you want to call that a tradition, then yeah, but there's really nothing for him to pull from. Whereas if we actually wanted to trace some of our roots and our spiritual practices, it's quite easy for us. But, you know, I'm not sure a lot of white people want to trace their roots and find out they were like pagan and like sacrificing lambs and bathing in blood while fornicating with each other. I don't think a lot of people will want to do that of European descent. So this is where I think she's getting at here.
I think she's like, okay, so the part that you read, she starts off, as long as the European believes the autonomous individual can be the basis of his own happiness, is a seat of moral conviction and rationalism, can be a source. So I think what she's trying to say is, like, in the first part is that you know, the culture will disintegrate because the European only looks to himself. He only has himself as a basis for his understanding and his connection to the world. And that self is not even a self that's connected, it's a rationalistic self, right? So like you can see that when, I don't know, like when I used to watch a lot of movies where like the white guy would be really angsty and he never looked to like his community. It was always more about like him feeling detached because he couldn't find a connection within himself. And I think that's what she's trying to get at here, is that when you base everything on the individual psyche, like what I was saying with therapy, you don't look to a community. So you see yourself as a solution to your own problems and as the only solution, right? And so that means that your culture will morally disintegrate because everyone within that culture is looking to themselves. Everyone is walking around with this anxiety because they cannot solve all of their problems and all of like the world's problems. And so and then that means that his spirit continues to wither because he sees his own weakness, you know, he can't fix things, he can't solve things. So that's why I think she says it is precisely the autonomous individual in Western European society who is its weakness. Because, and when she says there are no longer guidelines for him to follow, it's like even throughout history, like we learn about history through great men theory, right? That it's just great people who have produced like all of history. So he doesn't even have an understanding of a history that was communal. He only has an understanding of a history that's individualistic. Therefore, if he fails as an individual, he has no one to turn to. Does that make sense?
Wow, thank you.
Yeah,
That was great clarification.
Wow, that was so good.
Yeah. Wow, well, I definitely know what that meant, and I'm glad I asked that because now I have a much better definition and understanding of that. Thank you, Ash. Appreciate it.
No problem.
There's so this part reminds me how like in previous discussions people have mentioned that like we live in a society that like sorts people and like creates like archetypes of people, like various personalities. And I think this quote right here really hammering home how like this system just creates stereotypes, basically stereotypes of very damaged victims and crazy white people. So I want to read this part from 354. She said the individual is always in danger of dissolving into the function or the status. He continues, in the name of individualism, civilization manufactures stereotypes. Such stereotyping usually leads to a culturally formed stupidity, a stupidity of the job itself, which grows to encompass the person feeding on itself as both a defense against experience and the result of being deprived. It reminds me of like rappers and a lot of rap music where like wow like really it got to the point where like we are rapping having a good time about black people killing other black people, and that's like a state of wow you know, we have been driven to such a state where and we're like literally we're so deprived that in order to survive and sustain ourselves we have to accept this stupid behavior and learn to enjoy it for the people who remain confused in this war.
Yeah, I really liked that part too. I think that's really interesting that you made that correlation with like rap, because it's like I feel like we're in a new era. Well, what I thought was interesting about it is that like we're in a society that espouses like, oh, we're all free, but really, yeah, everyone exists as almost like a stereotype, and you're really only allowed to exist as a stereotype, and you only see like depictions of people as stereotypes in the media. And I thought that was interesting because I feel like this new generation of people, whether it's like a product of how bleak things look, sees everything in like it. Now it's not just like Black people killing each other, but it's like you killing yourself as an individual. Like the music is all about like overdosing or like taking or like being depressed. And like, so I feel like it's very interesting because it, like the stereotype of that once was like killing other Black people has like become this internalized, like you just slowly killing yourself or even killing yourself at a young age, which I like in the past, right? Rappers were killing each other, which was like the big thing in the media. And now they're all like overdosing and dying. So it's like they're only existing as these stereotypes too, if that makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
So on what page did you read that off of?
354.
Okay. She brings up on 354 as well. She says Diamond touches on the most revealing illnesses of contemporary Euro-American society, what he calls the pathological loneliness of the individual. And you know, I just read that again, and going back what you were talking about, SWA, and I think this is relevant. You remember the whole like sad boy wave where everyone is like, it's popular to be depressed. You know, it's everyone is like, you're surrounded by people, but you're still lonely. You know, it's sanctioned to be, you know, sad. You know, what do you think about that? I mean, honestly, yeah, I mean, honestly, that I don't know when she wrote this book, but she must have been. See, this is another prophecy, because the pathological loneliness that was a huge issue, you know, and that's what has led to a lot of these rappers dying and overdosing, because they, for some reason, they think they'll find companionship in drugs. Thoughts, anybody?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I was a participator in like the sad boy wave, because you know, under the system of white supremacy, I'm sure every Black male is very sad and depressed, so it makes sense. And I think that's it just like white supremacy, its effects bleeding out. You know, people aren't able to pinpoint, wow, I'm like depressed, even though I'm surrounded by other Black people. I'm like still depressed because these people can't fulfill me, because I can't fulfill myself, because I live in a system that has trained me against myself and against these people. But I'm unable to see that until I am unable to do some serious thinking and reflection on the society. But it makes total sense. I definitely remember the sad boy wave, and again, I was a sad boy. Still am a depressed boy under white supremacy.
Oh yeah.
I think the pathological loneliness thing, like you were saying, it's super prophetic, like which a lot of the stuff she talks about in here is. I really thought that was super interesting too. I think obviously it stems from like the rise in social media, the lack of like connection, and also the displacement of non-white people through like gentrification and things like that. Because I was thinking about like when you listen to Dr. Ani speak, like her old speeches, you can see her, and you can just see they're just like in this like whatever library or space in like New York or whatever city. And like you can just imagine like when people talk about Harlem back in the day, like people would just sit outside. Like there would be Black people just sitting outside with like Afrocentric like books and things like that. Like there was just a lot more community. And I feel like the pathological loneliness is from that lack of what she talks about, the communal healing rituals that we don't have anymore. And I think they're like, even though we didn't have them as much during like during the time that she wrote this, it's even more eroded to the point where like people are even more lonely, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does.
And also, like, kind of reminds me of the whole, like, I'm not gonna, not to, I don't know how to say it correctly, but the trendiness of being sad as well. Like, it's like a trend to be depressed, you know? And everyone's like using this as a way to like escape or like do these things. But I don't know how that relates to it, but I kind of want to bring that up too because it's really trendy. You know, it's one of those things that people enjoy, like the idea of either pretending to be sad or seeing someone else sad.
Yeah, what you're talking about, Ray, is exactly what the sad boy wave was. You know, that's exactly what was going on. They'd put people like, you know, Drake on TV, and that guy, all he did was get on TV and bitch and cry the whole time, you know. He was very depressed. I don't know if it was, you know, he's a victim, you know, but that was a lot of this was his fault. You know, he was propped up and they used him well, you know. And it's still evident today as we see. She also goes on to talk about how Diamond says that the Western technical order tends to produce standards and modal types rather than natural varieties of people, in spite of the ideology of individualism. This individual is always in danger of dissolving into the function or the status. And I don't know, does it, because we kind of talked about those stereotypes, but do you think that is kind of what is the same thing that she's talking about? We talked about that earlier about, you know, the stereotypes and caricatures, or how you're only allowed to live as stereotypes.
What was the question again?
She later in that paragraph on 354, she says Diamond talks about the technical order and tends to produce standards and modal types of people, modal types rather than natural varieties of persons, in spite of the ideology of individualism. The individual is always in danger of dissolving into the function or the status. I said my question was for when we talked about we talked about how people are only allowed to live as stereotypes earlier. Do you think that that's what she's also saying the same thing here?
Yeah, I believe so. And also just how frail the idea of being an individual is and what it really means.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to figure out what she means by Western technical order. But in my opinion, what were you going to say? So?
I think she means like Western technical order is just a white controlled society.
I thought of technology.
Yeah, I thought of maybe technology or not even just technology, but like the way the society is structured. So I guess what both of you guys were saying, like capitalism, etc. Like there's a limitation to who you can be, right? Because you have to, as an individual, produce food for yourself, pay for your water bill, pay for all of these other things. You have to like have housing and etc. So there's a limitation on, there's only certain modalities you can like fit into because at the end of the day, like you have to exist and live. That's why they always ask like children, like, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? One, it's like a moral thing, but another thing is like, what path are you gonna take so that you have you have sustenance, like you're able to survive in this world. You know what I mean? So like, I think that's the thing. Like you're limited, even though they talk about individuality, you really don't have much.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I thought something similar, the same thing, because after what we were saying, and you know, the whole sad boy wave, I saw like kind of this statement kind of bringing everything together and just talking about how, like, you know, technology or the society, you know, society in general moving into a more technical order, and how that has created, you know, these is not creating these varieties of people, but rather standards for people to, you know, achieve that standard, being a sad boy and being upset all the time. And you know, a person or an individual really losing their whole kind of, I don't know, maybe for lack of a better word, identity or whatever you want to call it, you know, and losing their whole being in that, you know, that idea of a sad boy. Now everything you do revolves around that standard, or, you know, being a sad boy. That's kind of how I've interpreted it.
Well said. Well said. From 355, I think this part is like very, very important because maybe you all have thoughts on it, maybe but I'm just gonna read it and give my piece. It is interesting here to take note of the two connotations of the European term jungle, related only via the logic of European chauvinism. One of these is that of an area of land dense and thick with vegetation, which has not been inhabited or cultivated. The other is that of a grouping of detached individuals, each one willing to commit any amount of violence to another to ensure his/her own survival. This image carries with it the pervasive fear that comes with the complete loss of communal and therefore moral order. When one is continually aware of the possibility of being attacked from anywhere at any time, the image is that of the European American city. The true jungle, and the second connotation are the New Yorks, the concrete structures that are truly opposites of the first definition of the jungle. That is where this extreme deterioration prevails, as opposed to those areas least touched by the European culture. Europeans have finally made their own conceptual invention, the complete lack of moral order, a reality, and this is the final outcome of the ideology of individualism. Damn. So this jungle, this concept of the jungle, if we look back at the origins of the European, this is how they had to exist in those caves, in those mountains. They have to exist with a trust no one, not even your mama or your sister, your brother. You know, this is where that kill or be killed mentality comes from. And this is why it's so embedded in our society. And what they have done, what the European has done, is took their like previous existence of living in a cave and living like off minimum resources, so they have to hoard everything and dominate one another for the resources. They've created a society based off this where they dominate everyone who's not them and hoard all the resources because they don't ever want to go back to how they were in those caves, like living off scraps and killing one another, not being able to trust anything, not even nature itself. So the individual is really interesting. I hope I made sense by what I just said. You know, like the caves have become the cities. Like the caves are now in the cities where like at any moment you could be killed, robbed, anything in between.
Yeah, I like that part about the jungle. It makes so much sense, you know. There's even a place around here called the jungle. And it just makes you realize like what Swa was saying, that European, the white person has produced a society that mimics what they existed in, and that no one is like, you can't trust anyone, and you're constantly in a state of like fear and paranoia just when you leave your home. And it's like even more intensified now, because now we live in a society where someone can just like, some white person can just like kill you at a store or something like that. And so I think it makes it even harder, right, to like have any sort of like community. And I think that's why like the Purge is such an interesting movie, because it's like the society that they believe would happen if they didn't have like the white order or something like that, which is not true at all.
Yeah, that is very true, and that goes back to me. I've because of what I've been learning, I've started to understand that everything that happens, all the terrible things that happen are because of the society white supremacy has created. Like Ash was saying, we have this constant paranoia, and that's a product of white supremacy. And that, and I know now that that life in the world doesn't have to be like this. That when you look at some of these indigenous people who haven't been reached out to or come in contact with civilization, they don't live that way. So it's definitely not like a question of whether it can be done. It's more about we aren't going to do it. We have no intention of doing it. This is the most ideal society, and this is the best possible arrangement on the planet. In the white supremacist mind, not for non-white people, obviously.
Yep.
Yeah.
Ash, you're gonna say something?
I was gonna say like it's interesting. Like when I would go to Ghana, I would see my cousin walking home from school by himself when he was like 5 or something, and that's so like rare to see in America. I think you can even get like arrested for that in America. I'm pretty sure Black people have gotten arrested for that before. And like I just think that's really, really interesting, and because they think of like Africa as like this morally depraved place where everyone is like suffering, but a child is able to like walk the streets freely, compared to like America, where even in like that doesn't happen.
You don't have any more comments moving forward?
No, I'm ready to move on to the next section about Protestantism, the Protestant ethic. I know, I keep putting anybody in general. I don't really know much about Protestant, whatever. I don't know much about it. I don't really understand it much. It just sounds like this desire and this need to be constantly working or stimulated, and that if you aren't working or being stimulated, you are in fact, committing a quote unquote a sin. I didn't really understand how that. But I did write down how I did kind of understand the role of Protestant. I did understand the role of it, and how the early church, its goal, or Catholicism or Christianity, early Christianity, its goal was mainly for dominating and domination, but how that left a void because I guess Europeans were still looking for something spiritual, or no, let me rephrase. Early Christianity taught Europeans how to dominate and basically interact with the other, but there was nothing for them on how to interact with each other. And that's where Protestantism came in to fill that void. But I still don't understand what Protestantism is. If I'm off the mark, somebody can help me or clarify.
Yeah, Protestantism is, I feel like it's safe to view it just like any other religion. It was just used to give it was just used temporarily to give the Europeans something to get their goals. acquired, because remember, like this entire majority of this portion that we read is about how, like, at the end of the day, like, we really don't care about anything besides keeping white supremacy like going. I think she says that like multiple times, how like there's not really no unity. The goal is to keep our system going, and then we'll fend for ourselves and bicker among each other. So yeah, maybe by reading this from 358, she says prior to the Protestant statement, what tended to give direction to European behavior was the common desire to rule the world, and two, the shared commitment to build a technological colossus. There was no formal intercultural ethnic provided by an institutionalized religious statement. There were only the informal normative directives of what would later become scientism and the order imposed by the European interpretation of the rational. This is what is found in Plato's Republic. So there you have it. Like, whatever the European claims that they believe or practice is not really going to be the truth. They're about controlling the planet. That's all they're about. And I think we understand that we'll be getting it somewhere.
Yeah, I think
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Ash. Okay.
To add some like historical context, like before capitalism was like feudal in Europe, at least, was like feudalism, where like basically you worked the land and there was a feudal lord, and you didn't get wages or any money, right? You just had to work that land because that feudal lord by the Catholic Church was supposed to be like more connected or whatever. Or you know how the Catholic Church had like all these hierarchies, right? So the Lord is like someone that you have to work for them. So I think what she's trying to say is like during that, before like Protestantism, which was like I think that was when Martin Luther was like separating from the Catholic Church. I think before Protestantism, you just had to work because you had to give to someone else who was deemed like better than you. There was no the intracultural behavior was just hierarchical. But then with like Protestantism, like she talks about how it has these ideals of like thrift, foresight, parsimony, order, punctuality. It imbues in the worker, the person, that them doing this is like them also fulfilling some godly aspiration, them being closer to God, right? Whereas in a feudal system, it was like you're never going to be as close to God as this Lord is. So just keep working for him, and maybe like he'll help you, like go to heaven or something, if that makes sense. But under capitalism, it's this idea that if the worker is thriftful, if he is punctual, if he, works and tills his land, then he can be closer to godliness, or whatever idea of godliness white people had. It's like a Christian, it's like what modern day Christians are. Like the Protestants left Europe, right, to come to America. And so that's why America has a really messed up work ethic too.
Thank you for that, Ash.
Yeah. Yeah, so much. Anyone have anything to share from 359 by any chance?
No, I don't really have anything else to share. That was pretty much all that I had.
I wanted to share from 357. That was the last thing that I had. It was the part that I was saying earlier where she says, thrift, foresight, parsimony, order, punctuality, perseverance, sacrifice, out of these, or she doesn't say this, she's quoting someone, out of these austere Protestant virtues, a new kind of economy was created, and within it, a new kind of personality proceeded to function. At one end of classic capitalism stands Jacob Fugger II. At the other end, John D. Rockefeller I. And I thought that that was really interesting because I don't know who Jacob Fugger is. I should have looked them up. But I just thought that that part was really interesting in that there's an idea in America that, you know, like the harder you, like there's an idea of a meritocracy, and people like tell this to their kids from a very early age that like you have to, if you work hard enough, you can like achieve whatever you want, which is obviously like a lie. And I think I was just wondering, like, do you think that the non-white people who tell their kids that, do you think they really believe that they can be this like I think it's just, like, we don't see people who are really rich as morally depraved. We see them as like of a higher moral character because they somehow had the ingenuity to like do better. And I'm wondering if, like, do you think non-white people really believe that and really aspire to that, or do you think it's just like a survival tactic?
I think non-white people absolutely. I'm not going to speak for all of them, but for the most that I've seen, because non-white people have a tendency to start praising and worshiping people who have gotten money, and they think they do that for those exact reasons, like you're saying, because that there's probably something special about that person, or they did all the things right. They're probably an amazing person. That's probably why they got to where they are. Yeah.
Yeah, what was the question? I lost my train of thought.
The question was like, do you think that non-white people genuinely believe in like the meritocracy, and that people who are billionaires are like of a higher moral character?
Oh, I remember it. Absolutely, I remember. Yeah, I definitely think they definitely drink the Kool-Aid, thinking that they can buy their way out of oppression or get enough comfortable making trinkets to escape white supremacy. But maybe in old age they realize that, wow, I never got away. But I doubt people realize that. But yeah, to answer the question, yeah, non-white people definitely think they can ascend to whiteness in as many
Yeah, I agree too. And I think on like, you know, how Neely Fuller talks about like how white people are not confused about racism, white supremacy. I think on the opposite, like on one spectrum, non-white people drink the Kool-Aid, and they really think that if they work hard enough, they can like become someone and have this great moral character because they worked hard. And I think white people know better, like how we talked about in the other chapter about rhetoric. I think they know that they just have to find someone to sacrifice, and they just have to like, you know, like scrap and fight. And it's not about morality, but they're going to pretend like it is because that just helps them play the game. Because that's how they came to America, and that's how they've built wealth, right? Is like sacrificing and killing others.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that as well. I definitely do think that non-white people drink the Kool-Aid, and it comes from the idea of like from childhood, you know, when you're growing up and everyone's just like, oh, all you need is a lot of money to do this, to do that. If you have a lot of money, no one can tell you anything, you know. Or if you have a lot of money, that means you are like higher in status, or you have the most power, or all this, blah blah blah. And then we have these the people who do have a lot of money, in a sense of like things that they have it all together, but in reality, it's like they're little puppets. It's like they're the most lost. So it's very interesting. That was definitely a great question as well to discuss how non-white people like drink the Kool-Aid, quote unquote. But yeah, I definitely do believe that they be amping it up. They amp up the racism, white supremacy because they think that they are escaping it, but in reality, they like play along with it to where it's like it doesn't make sense, but it's okay. It just adds to their manipulation. And then I also didn't have anything after that.
Yeah. I guess we get into closing comments then. You want to start?
Okay, I can start with closing comments. Just to close off with these few pages that we read. Community doesn't exist in racism and right under the system of racism and white supremacy. But it's important that non-white people get on code and find things that are do things that are constructive. And I don't know, I don't want to use the word help each other, but
yeah, we need to help each other.
Okay,
I agree.
I didn't want to use the word help as a term of like charity, but yes, help each other move in a direction of ending or moving in a direction of producing justice. And also white people, they don't know anything about community, so stop listening to them.
Yeah, for me, my closing comments are this was a little bit harder to understand, but I'm glad I came today. I definitely understand a little bit more. I understand how racist men, racist women interact with one another, and basically how their interactions are affecting the cultural other, the non-white person in the world. I'm interested to learn more about Protestantism and its role in all of this. And yeah, like Ray said, don't listen to white people. They don't know anything, about pretty much. I mean, they know things, but not anything worthwhile knowing about. All it does is bring chaos and destruction. So
yeah, yeah, this is great. I love this chapter. Very like a test and like my like ability to be patient and read this over and over. But yeah, the first world's people, as Dr. Marimba calls non-white people, are definitely up against something really, really just colossus, and the problem will be solved though. And I think I want to read this from 360. She says it was excellent for the purposes of subjugation, but not for the creation of the aggressive individual, not for self-determination, nor for the budding capitalist. It was the objective of the Western European imperialism that accounted for the leniency and paternalism of the Catholic Church. So I think that just goes to show, to keep in mind that whatever we're getting from white people, it's not gonna necessarily be capable of making us giving us justice. You know, whatever they give us is going to be some way, shape, or form to make us more docile or easily controlled. And I think that is a really important takeaway from this, is that just the whole book is just don't trust Europeans, I think, but that's it.
Yeah, I thought this chapter was really hard in terms of like It has a lot of nuances, and I would think that I have to, like Swaz and go back and reread it a couple times because it's like really dense. But I I think this is also one of my so far favorite sections that we've read. I thought it put a lot into perspective in terms of, like, I think you guys were talking about what was happening on the Capitol today, or the day before yesterday. It put a lot of that into perspective, and I feel like it just like helps to fortify me and my understanding of like this world and like especially this country, and not being like shocked or surprised anymore by all of the contradictions and self-negating behavior and like community destructing behavior too. Yeah, so yeah.
Okay, thank you everyone.